So the prize is named after Ed Leamer, who's an economist at UCLA, and Bob Rosenthal, who's my colleague and a psychologist at UC Riverside. And both Ed and Bob, working separately, but decades ago, and long before it was fashionable, called attention to the twin problems of specification search and the file drawer problem. And I think when that was not fashionable, when they were talking about that back in the 1980s, I think their colleagues were irritated with them because they were just busy. They wanted to get their papers published. They needed statistical findings to do that. But I think that it's taken social science decades to listen to their call for just really sort of fundamentally about what makes for credible social science research. But I think that we've come a long way, and I think that this gathering is a great example of that, the new movement for transparency in the social sciences. And I also, just as a political scientist, I want to say that I think just it's fundamentally critical, these kinds of conversations that we're having in this a new world that we're emerging that's kind of a post-fact science denial world, that it's really incumbent on us to do everything we can to make our research as credible as possible. The thing I want to say is that, I don't know about Ed Leamer, but Bob Rosenthal is my friend and colleague at UCR, and he told me that he'd be watching online right now. So could everybody turn around and just everybody wave, hello, Bob? He's probably waving back to us. It's raining here, Bob. We're in good spirits, but it's raining up here. Okay, so the award comes in two categories, the emerging researchers. So each of these categories has kind of a list of criteria that makes you kind of eligible to win the award. But essentially, the Emerging Researchers Award is for junior scholars who are developing and innovating new methods and research transparency. And then the Leaders in Education Award is meant for more senior researchers who are making contributions to either the curriculum or the infrastructure to help develop and professionalize the next generation of researchers to use these methods. I went on my own and I looked on the website, and I noted that the award had 44 nominations total this year from 18 disciplines and 12 countries. So that's a lot. And we have selected, I didn't get this right, 3 Leaders in Education Award and 7 Emerging Researcher Awards. And we're going to do those presentations right now. It's exciting. It's kind of like a game show, you know. So I think what's going to happen is I think I'm going to call your name, and it's going to be like, come on down. You're the, okay. Okay, are we going to do it that way? Okay, first up, Dr. Lorena Barba from George Washington University. I should mention that the way we're I don't know who to look at.
Thank you.
So, and then are they going to sit down?
Yes.
Okay, so what's happening is I'm just calling them up. They're going to sit down, and then we're going to have a panel presentation where they're each going to say a word or two about what their research are, except for perhaps you might not. So, okay, next winner, Dr. Zacharie Tsala Dimbuene. Oh, wait, yeah, sorry. We need the prop first. Okay. Now, I know not everybody's here today, so Eric Young, Wagenmakers. I think he's not here, but we'll applaud him anyway. Beth Berrybolt. Oh, there she is, okay. From down in... We're not used to this water coming out of the sky. It's kind of weird. Okay. Abel Brodeur. Those are fake smiles, by the way. Graeme Blair. I know he's not here. Political scientist, by the way. Let's see. Michelle Nitchin? Nitchin. That's it. That's what I guessed. I knew the IJ was like I. And Sasha Eskamp. We have two. So maybe I'll get in the. Felix Schönbrodt. And Elaine Toomey. Okay, so we don't have a lot of time. We go right into the panel now, or we do something different? Okay, so there's not much time. We probably have, a half an hour for discussion. So if we could, Lorena, maybe you don't have to go, but I think for everybody else to maybe take 2 minutes to say why you're here. And we'll start, we'll start with Zacharie, or Zach. Do you go by Zach? Zach. Yes. Yeah, okay, so Zach. And then if you could just take a couple of minutes, and the reason I'd like to start with Zach is that what I'd like from the emerging researchers is to take 2 and no more than 3 minutes to explain your contribution in a way that could make sense to anybody. And so what I'm thinking here is the Templeton Foundation is generously funding your time sitting here, and so if you could explain your research in a way that would make sense to a donor, to a taxpayer, just put it in plain language, okay? And just what your contribution is. And then we're going to open it up to discussion. So start with Zach.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll start with a simple question. How many Francophones do we have in the room?
How many people speak French? French speakers?
Okay. Yeah, which is great. So I'm happy to be here because I'm pretty new in the movement, because the very first time I attended the transparency workshop, it was in March 2016 in Nairobi. At that time, I was working for African Population and Health Research Center. So since I attended the first workshop, then I say, wow, this is a very interesting idea. But at the same time, when I discussed with my friends from Francophone countries, the idea was totally new. Then I say, oh, I cannot keep this interesting movement for myself. I need to commit and spread the idea, because research transparency for me, it's very, very important, especially in terms of policy making. Because if we have a bad result and the policymakers are using this result to make a decision, then it will bring us in a bad situation in the countries. And then I wrote to the BITS people to organize I couldn't say that it's the very first Francophone workshop, but it was the very first workshop in the biggest Francophone country in sub-Saharan Africa, which is the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So I will also use this opportunity to thank the BITS team to funding this workshop, because it was very interesting in the sense that among the attendees, I had professors, PhD and master's students. So I had time to explain to them how important we need to be in our research to make sure that everything which is published is open and everybody can verify what has been published. So I think I'll stop there, and if you have any question, I will be happy to clarify. Thank you.
Maybe, which way do you want to go? We're going to go down the line, so start down there. Down there. So that's Elaine. So we'll start with Elaine. Yeah.
Sorry.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's really an honor. So I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the Health Behaviour Change Research Group in the National University of Ireland in Galway. And essentially what my work has looked at is the implementation or intervention fidelity within behaviour change interventions. So essentially that's looking at what we, the developers, design to happen. What we, the developers, design to happen in our interventions or programs. Does it then actually happen? And then are we actually testing what we have aimed to test? So essentially looking at the transparency of that process from development of an intervention throughout then to the outcomes and testing the effects of the intervention. And I think that's mostly everything. Thank you very much.
We can applaud after each one. Yeah. You both
So
have to.
what we have created is a software package that allows people to check the statistical values reported in paper. So basically it scans a paper, you get a sort of spell check for statistical tests to see if I say T with 10 degrees of freedom equals 2, P equals smaller than 0.05, you want to know if that's actually correct. So it recomputes T with 2 degrees of freedom. And that's very important, I think, for meta-analysis and also to detect if the research is actually done correctly. Now, Michelle and Nuite especially has worked the last 4 years on extending this package and also applying it to check how many errors are being made, and maybe you can talk more about that.
Thank you. Yeah, so we applied the package on over 30,000 psychology papers, and it turned out that in half of those papers we found at least one inconsistent result. Which sounds very dramatic. It doesn't necessarily have to be because a lot of those mistakes or inconsistent reports were somewhere in the third decimal. What was perhaps more surprising is that in 1 in 8 papers we found inconsistent results that could have changed its statistical conclusion. So we're trying now to make this package even more available also for people who are not used to working with R, for instance in a web app, and we're in contact with some journals who can use it in peer review, so that we prevent these errors from showing up in the literature.
So yeah, it will. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you to everyone, Bits, Ted especially. It's a great honor. Basically, I'm an economist, and in my research, I'm mainly interested in documenting the extent of publication bias in economics and social science, and also trying to relate this to characteristics of the papers. So whether there's going to be more publication bias if the paper is done with, different data sets, different methods, whether it's a randomization, whether it's an instrumental variable strategy, so different methodology. Also whether the paper is written by a junior versus a senior author, whether it's theoretical model. And the reason I'm interested in these things is people have they have incentives to do a bit of specification searching to publish. And these incentives could be higher for people who are not tenured, for instance, could be higher depending on some sort of methodology that you're using. And I'm just trying to document the extent of publication bias. It's much easier than obviously finding solutions. How can we try to make things better, trying to reduce publication bias? So right now I'm starting to work on different ways trying to reduce publication bias and to make social science more transparent. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Beth Barabalt, and I'm a fourth-year PhD student at UC Irvine. So I'm fairly early on in my career, but this is nice in the context of how open science is progressing, because this is now not only getting far spread in the field, but getting into the public consciousness, and it's also the Bayesian Renaissance. So I've had the opportunity to, from the start of my research career, start integrating these things into my personal research. So every single piece of research I've ever done, IP registered, data and code is online as it progresses, and having that hard commitment to doing open science. And another example of that is I just completed a very large experiment on comparing different theories of attention and collecting a very large data set. But before we're publishing, we're actually replicating our own research which is something that I think we should do more often. One recent project that I think is especially germane to this topic is we're developing a new method of meta-analysis in my lab. So normally when people do meta-analysis, you either do an exact replication, which gives you one data point, or a theoretical replication that gives you one data point. We're developing a new method that's very minimal time commitment, minimal resource commitment, but that gets you many replication data points by randomizing things and have an individual participant do basically 14 replication experiments within an hour, then having many participants at each location and doing this in a kind of a mini lab style, doing this at 7 different universities across 3 continents. Yeah, so that's what I've been working on.
And then, Lorena, you wanted to just say a few words?
Well, just to mention another aspect that interests me, which is beyond the education track that this award is recognizing, that in our work, we're also, as I mentioned in my talk, very much involved with the reproducibility concerns. But one thing that some of you may not have thought about is that in some areas of computational physics, for example, we have to really think about what we mean by reproducible computational research when the computations themselves require access to supercomputers and require running a simulation for 2 weeks or longer on many processors. So when you're talking about supercomputing, it's quite another beast. And what we've been proposing is that even if we may not be able to reproduce a very large-scale simulation at that for computational science or climate or all of that, if we penetrate the whole education and building up of a computational research project from the beginning using reproducible practices, then we can at least raise the level of confidence for the research that uses that kind of resource that is very hard for others to have access to.
Thank you. So I think we're going to open this to we're going to, instead of having the panel talk to each other, we're going to open it up. But I want to seed one start to the conversation. So this is almost by construction of the sort of contrasting the emerging researchers with the leaders in education, is that it seems that the emerging researchers are working on tools that essentially diagnose problems. So there's the error checking, there's the detecting publication bias, disclosure, and replication, right? That they're sort of diagnosing problems, and the leaders in education are trying to sort of think about how do we solve those. And the way I think about this is sort of like in medicine, right? That we want to sort of move beyond sort of diagnosing and treating illnesses to really thinking about prevention. And so this is sort of set up in this way, right, where the leaders in education are really thinking about how do we create training in a way that makes use of these tools, but in a way that kind of prevents the problem before it gets started. And so that would be the question then, and I don't know if I could even just throw that to the panel to think about, you know, how would you take some of the tools that you're working on and sort of integrate it in a way that would be more prevention rather than like catching, you know, I don't want you to stat check my papers because you'll probably find some things, right? And so instead of just catching people what they're doing wrong, but to try to make it so that people are incentivized or build cultures that get people to sort of prevent problems in the first place. So I don't know if anybody wants to say anything.
Well, if I can answer this, I think the reasons why we focus on the extent of the problem is simply because it's easier, and it's much harder to find solutions to this problem. And I've been, you know, very pessimist about changing, you know, whether people can change norms, whether we can, you know, make research more transparent. And over the past 2 years, I've been changing my mind more and more, and I think that there are solutions that we can make things better. And the thing that struck me the most is I received an email at one point from an editor of the Journal of Health Economics. And basically, they send emails to everybody working in that field, health economics. And all the journals, all at the same time in that specific field, posted online an editorial of negative findings. And the idea was that if your results are significant or not, that's not really important to us, the editors of these journals. What really matters is the methodology and whether we're interested in the topic or not. And they remind referees since February 2015 of this, that what we're interested in is whether it's interesting and whether it's well done. Whether it's significant or not, it's not really important. And I've been, interested in this and trying to test this, and preliminary results are very promising. You just see that since they introduced this, publication bias has been decreasing by a lot. I mean, most of it is just gone when you look at the extent just at p-hacking, specification searching. And I was shocked. It just happened 2 weeks ago. I didn't expect that it would be so fast. It happened just a year and a half ago. But I think as a young researcher, maybe I was more pessimist. Maybe I just wanted to document the problem first before thinking of how can we solve a problem that is not maybe well documented. And I guess that was me, the approach that I chose. But I think it was just easier, to be honest, to document the problem.
Of course, yes.
I actually think that you have a really very good point also, that you want to document a problem before you start solving it, I would say.
And shaming's a really good incentive too, by the way, for both of your papers.
Yeah, we're not here to shame people. That's like the first thing. But I think the problem is twofold, because you want to document a problem. Once you do that, you want to prevent it in the future, but that's not the whole solution to the problem, because there's also a whole body of literature out there that already suffered these problems, so suffered publication bias, suffered reporting errors.
Yeah.
So only preventing these problems from now on is a very good thing, but not on itself. You also need to find a way to try to correct the literature that is already there as much as possible, I believe.
I think I'm quite lucky in my field, in implementation science, in behaviour change interventions, because definitely in the last while there has most certainly been an increase and a kind of an increasing focus on trying to make that type of intervention more specific and more scientific, I suppose, because typically behaviour change interventions are often quite complex. They involve people's behaviours. It's so hard to kind of really measure accurately what's going on. So I definitely think in the last while there's been much more of a shift to try and pinpointing the active ingredients within those interventions and trying to see what actually makes them work, to then be able to reproduce them in different settings. I think there's definitely, coming from my field, there's a lot of room for improvement, especially in terms of methods and trying to increase training for methods. So process evaluation would be one type of method that's looking at that process of the intervention. And at the moment, there isn't maybe enough training in those types of methods. So I think that's one way of maybe trying to prevent the problem before it happens, is to increase maybe a focus on methods rather than outcome results. And that would be coming from my field, but it's probably relevant to a lot of other fields as well. So.
Cool. Well, Don beat you to it. Yeah. But you can go next.
I've heard a fair amount of hand-wringing about how the replication crisis will affect young people in the field and their faith in the state of science. I wonder if you could comment on whether your work as emerging leaders in the field is driven more by pessimism about the state of science or optimism.
Optimism, definitely. I mean, sometimes it's really depressing when you read these newspaper stories, like nothing replicates in psychology and everything is just nonsense, and psychology is a non-science, because psychology is my field, so this feels almost personal. And then you think about all the effects that you heard in your first year, and nothing of it seems to replicate, so you think, have I been living in a lie? But then you see all these really great initiatives emerge here as well, and all the initiatives of the Open Science Framework, the journals that start, handing out badges for good behavior, basically. And sometimes I'm not sure if I'm living in a bubble because I'm in this type of research and I only speak to people who are very much in favor of this. But sometimes when you see data of people sharing their data with their papers, for instance, and I really think that we're heading in the right direction, and maybe we have a long way to go, but it definitely we will get there. So I would say optimism.
Any pessimists in the crowd? Yeah.
I definitely think optimism, and even the fact that we're here at an event like this with so many kind of similar-minded people who really believe in this, and even from all the presentations earlier, there's so much interest in it, so I think that's fantastic, and definitely optimism from my side anyway.
Can I add something?
No.
Yeah. For me, I think transparency in research, I see it as a culture for the current generation and for the next generation, in the sense that yet everything, many things has been published, but it's not usually easy to see if what has been published is reliable and is transparent. Okay, so let's say my experience is that, let's say, if, for instance, today I send an email to TED and say, okay, I'm reading your paper, which is very, very interesting, and then I want to use it in my teaching. So as a catalyst, what I expect is a positive response. You will say, okay, this is my paper, this is my code, this is my data. But I tried many times, I don't get a positive response. You will just say, okay, for instance, I wrote to someone and you say, okay, no, the data is publicly available. Then I say, okay, I understand. And I've been using this data for very long. But there is a huge difference between the data available and the one that you use to get the published result. So you will see that the person will just not respond when you will say, okay, I want the version of data that you use to get your published result. So it just means that, of course, I think the movement is increasing, is spreading very fast, but we still have a long way to go. Thanks.
Although that's probably a case where shaming would go a long way, if we could help you with that. Let's see, Ted was next, so, and then we'll make away.
To follow up on Abel's point, I found it fascinating. I definitely want to hear more about it. Oh, sorry. Should I use the... Okay, sorry about that. So I found it fascinating what Abel was saying, that maybe looking at recent data, some of the indicators you've used to detect publication bias are falling in this set of journals that signed a certain statement. But it'd be very interesting, I think, for all of us in this room to carry out analyses like yours, Abel. But your analysis in your AEJ paper used a bit older, data. There's the sort of Gerber-Malhotra studies that used older data. So in the social sciences, there are these now kind of classic references documenting the extent of publication bias.
Yeah.
I'm so curious to know what those figures look like over the last 3 or 4 years, when there's now so much more awareness around these issues among journal editors, referees, in the scholarly community. It's like a nice, almost summary statistic for a lot of the problems we're concerned about. So I just wonder if you had more to say about that intriguing point you made before.
So I think, there's two ways to look at this. One of them is over time. Things maybe have been, there's less and less publication bias because there's new norms, there's new practice by journals. Another way to look at it is, I think most of this literature, the Gerber, my own paper, we just look at top journals. And so something that would be interesting is to look at more journals. So now what I'm doing with co-authors is look at top 30 in economics. I mean, top 30 is not, you don't have all the journals, but you find the pattern in even, not top field journals in economics, this pattern of publication bias, and it doesn't seem to vary too much top 5 or outside of top 5 in economics. Over the years, I'm pessimist. I don't think it's getting that better when you look at the data. It was, we had 2005 to 2011, didn't see much. Maybe 2011 to 2016 would, maybe something happen afterward. we look at whether the data was available online. So some journals force authors to put it online. Didn't find much. It could be because of many factors. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. We shouldn't, we should put the data online for other reasons. But when we look just at whether it decreased publication bias, there was not a big effect. Maybe we're able to replicate the paper. Maybe there's a lot of benefits to it. But at least what we looked at, we didn't find much.
It'd be interesting if you find better results in the lower ranked journals. That would be cool. Yeah.
So I'm definitely all for sharing data and the code used to produce the particular type of analyses that go into publications. I have a couple questions. One, whose responsibility is it to provide this? Like, for example, is it the scientist's responsibility to host their own server in their laboratory? Or is it the responsibility of the journals to incentivize this? And then my second question is, yes, it'd be great if if the data and the code can be shared. However, at least I come from the field of neuroscience, and there's tons of different types of data. There's electrophysiology, calcium imaging. Like, who's going to take on the responsibility of putting this into some sort of standard format, so anybody who's interested in actually replicating something can actually go in and make sense of all this?
But we're not going to be able to help neuroscience today, because I know that the way you collect and store data is very I mean, what we essentially collect are these rectangular data sets that, but the thing, if I could just blurt out, I think everyone here on the table would say that it's better to host your code and data on your own server than not sharing it at all, but it is really not best practice to do that. And it's much better to use one of the standard archives that curate code and data and have a permanent, that makes it citable, but it also makes it permanent so that when you move to a new university, the data don't just disappear. So, and there's a bunch of them that are out there, but it hasn't, yeah. We'll work on neuroscience next.
Hi, I was just wondering, by the way, I'm not an economist, I'm just getting into economics, but I was just wondering, do you also consider the issue about the complexity of data? Because if the data is too complex and you're trying to share it, it can introduce a lot of bias that way, because the complexity is not fully understood, always.
We do not, I didn't replicate these studies. I didn't look at whether people replicated these studies. But, as I said, I think it's just very important to put the data online. I think we all agree that journals should push, in favor of this. Whether it's somebody who's an expert or not who is going to replicate the study. I think even non-expert can have a look. Maybe they will find something. Sometimes it's interesting to have somebody who's not an expert in the field to look at your own work.
Okay, we have 2 minutes remaining.
But I think that complex data being shared is actually one of the places where open data can really shine. Because if you have a complex data set, you might have some preconceived notion about how you want to analyze it going into it. But if it's complex data, somebody might pick it up and look at it an entirely different way. And I think that's a real advantage that you can never get if you just keep the data at home. So I think that's actually a positive and not a negative.
Yeah. Okay, I think you're going to get the last question. So make it good. Yeah.
Thank you. No, I was thinking, in social science, it seems like a lot of the interesting questions, at least the data that could be used for those, is often proprietary. How do you see that moving forward? I mean, personally, I don't think it's going to get less proprietary. And how do you deal with that in an open data framework?
I think it's actually a good thing because people can do pre-analysis plan. Whereas if it's publicly available data, when you get the data, nobody knows. So I think it's actually a good thing in terms of forcing people to do pre-analysis plans. And that are critical because it's admin data. There's a moment that you get access to the data. Maybe you need to write down the project before having access to it. So I see, upsides.
So with proprietary data, you mean also that if you put it on, you cannot put it online, right? Because it costs money, basically. Then at least what you can do is you can put summary statistics online, like say a covariance matrix or something, so that you can do the analysis with. For a lot of analysis, you don't need the whole data, you only need summary statistics, so that can work. A colleague of mine had the idea of making an R package that would generate data like your original data.
Yeah.
So it's not like the actual data, but it would simulate data that would have all the characteristics of your actual data and would give the same result. It would be a fun way to handle that problem as well, I guess. It's maybe add some bias to the data, something like that. That can work as well. But
So cool. Garrett just negotiated one more question. So.
It's a fast question. So I'm in political science, and
All right.
and I don't know. Yeah,
You too.
The political scientists
Yeah.
are lacking. I tried to bring them here, but they're not. And I'm at Davis, and it seems like one of the things that I think about is there's just a lot of investment in original data collection and putting data sets together and all of this, and then you share it, and it feels like, oh man, like I want to share it, but that took a lot of time. And so I'm curious in terms of your fields and where we're at, like how do we resolve and incentivize data sharing from people who do all the original data collection and data management organization, and are you finding that data in these people that do this work are being cited or being co-authored? They're just co-authored in because they contributed the data, and is that something we need to work on or not?
And the fundamental unfairness across disciplines that psychologists have subject pools, and we typically do not, and so you guys get free data.
Well, I think it's a very valid point, and I understand the sentiment that you don't want to sort of spend years collecting the data and then just giving it away for anyone who also wants to answer a question with it. I think a possible solution could be, and I think it has been suggested before, to say, well, we're going to install a time frame in which you have the sole rights to publish something about your data, so you have the chance to get everything out of it that you want. I do think that would not and should not withhold you from at least sharing the data for people who want to verify analyses, for instance. But I'm sure that there can be ways to not just put it online, but put it online with some restrictions that people can email you to get access to the data set. But I think it seems fair to sort of put a time frame on it. But in the long run, I think data is not a private property. It's also communal. But yeah, I think we should sort of meet in the middle there. Yeah.
Bobby.
Oh, so Kevin let me.
I knew it.
He knows I'm a nasty person, so he actually gave me the microphone for a second. I have a question that I want to ask you guys that I don't want the answer recorded for. So you can talk about it later, you can turn that off, or you can come talk to me. But here's the thing. I look up there and I see how most of you are very young, and it's very exciting in the emerging researchers to see that. It's also not very exciting for me as an old gray-haired person to see so many of my colleagues not being pleased about what's going on now with replication and reproducibility and pre-registration and name your, but Bob Rosenthal, thank you for the file jar. And so anyway, I would really love to know what kinds of challenges or roadblocks you guys have found, or not, within some age divide or some seniority divide. However, I want you to think about that, but I don't want to put you on the spot of actually having to answer in front of there. So, Kevin, ball's in your court.
We've run out of time.
I have tenure.
Oh, yeah. There we go. All right.
The main obstacle is, of course, the fact that, and it also addresses your question, although we can come up with solutions that are temporary band-aids, the problem is the reward system. We're not rewarded for open science yet properly. We're not rewarded for releasing code, releasing data. Citation is the only, people count citations, publications in certain journals, and the amount of money you're bringing in to the institution, and there isn't really enough funding, ways to fund this type of work. and to recognize people that actually do things reproducibly. Right. Our colleagues in the Promotions and Tenure Committee have no idea. 90% of them have no idea about what all of this interest is. So we have a very difficult job ahead of us to change the culture at the level of the people who are awarding promotion and evaluating researchers on the basis of everything else that we're not discussing here.
So Ted and I were just thinking the same thought, which, just to respond to that, is that this is why we have the prize. So you guys can put this on your CV, and I guarantee you are going to be rewarded for this. Like that line on your CV has cash value.
So when discussing with people about open science, researchers, at least based on my experience, researchers are very concerned about pre-analysis plan. Because when I discuss with my colleagues from economics, they say, oh, but research is also about playing with data. So how am I going to write a pre-analysis plan when I don't know exactly what I'm going to do? I need to play with data to come out with something interesting which can be published. So this is something researchers are really worried about. So I don't know what will be the answer in the movement, but I used to tell them that you cannot start playing just with data because you want to come up with something publishable. You need to know what is your research question and what is your hypothesis, but you don't want to answer your hypothesis just by playing with data.
So everybody, just come back tomorrow and we will solve all of these problems and tomorrow's BITS session, okay? So thanks.